We're going to be considering the UK market's road to recovery, thinking about what needs to happen in order to get our outbound market up and running again in a safe way, and also how destinations are adapting and preparing in order to be able to welcome and tempt tourists back again, thinking about how the behaviour and desires of the UK traveller might have changed as a result of the last few months. We've got a panel of 3 extremely experienced travel industry figures to talk through some of these challenges and opportunities. We are joined by Gloria Guevara, who is Chief Executive and President of the World Travel and Tourism Council, and also former Secretary of Tourism for Mexico. WTTC represents the global private sector of travel and tourism and does a lot, particularly to measure and monitor the economic impact that travel and tourism makes to the destinations we travel to. Also joined by Tracey Poggio, who is Chair of the Association of National Tourist Offices and Representatives, Antor, in the UK. It's a lobbying organisation for the world's tourist offices with more than 60 members in the UK. And Tracey is also Head of Media and Marketing for the Gibraltar Tourist Board. And finally, Derek Moore, who is Deputy Chair of the Association of Independent Tour Operators, Aito, which has around 120 specialist and independent tour operator members, as well as a travel agent partner network. I hope Derek wouldn't mind me saying he's got longer experience in travel than many of us. He co-founded the adventure operator Explore back in the 80s. Gloria, if we could possibly come to you first, please, for the more global picture, would you be able to share with us WTTC's view on how and when the global market is likely to recover from the crisis?
Yes, absolutely. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. As probably you know, WCTC represents the global private sector, and our members are over 200 CEOs from around the world that include all the industries, from airlines, airports, cruises, all of the above. Here you have a photo of our ExCom, but basically we have this global view as 30% of our members are in Europe, 30% are based in Asia, and 30% in America, 10% of the rest of the world. Currently, Chris Noceta from Hilton is our chairman. If we move to the next slide, we have done research for many years, and these are the results from last year. Basically, as you can see in the graph in the bottom, travel and tourism has outpaced the growth of the economy for 9 years, and last year was not the exception. We grew 40% more than the economy with 3.5%, and 10% of the global economy was the contribution for travel and tourism. What's important is 1 in 10 jobs depend on our sector, 330 million jobs. And again, these are numbers from last year. Very similar in the case of the UK, is 9% of the total, but in terms of jobs is 1 in 9 jobs. Now, very relevant also here is when you look at all the jobs that were created last year in the planet, in all the sectors and all the industries, you will find that 1 out of 4 of new jobs were in our sector, which is very important, as unfortunately those jobs are not going to be created this year due to the situation. Now, so this is the global context. 10%, we contribute to 10% of the global GDP. That includes domestic and international, as you will see here. And that's an interesting mix of 70% or 71% is the contribution from domestic, which is very relevant. Now, moving to the next, last year during World Travel Mart, we announced our data, of course, for the years before, and we have been announcing the impact of this crisis. And as you will see, we have quantified, we started with 50, then 75. The last numbers, unfortunately, look like a little bit over 100 million jobs have been impacted in our sector. That's equivalent to 2.7 also trillion jobs in GDP, because travel and tourism is quite big. It's very relevant. We have grown in the last 20 years significant. And this unprecedented situation that we're living is bigger than any other crisis in the past. It's 5 times, for instance, the financial crisis. And of course, it's 9 times 9/11. Moving to the next, as we see the relevance of our impact, last year we announced our crisis report. If you move to the next, please, you will see that we look at 90 different situations that we had in the last 20 years, and we classified those in 4 different types, from natural disasters, terrorism attacks, political instability, and of course, outbreaks. And when we announce this report that is available for everyone to look at, we look at also the average recovery time frame. That's one of the questions right now that everyone is asking us. How long do you think it's going to take us to recover? What was fascinating from last year when we announced and we look at these different 90 situations that we had, uncertainty or political instability is what we call the mother of all crises. And in this case, you will see that the average time frame was around 22 months, and 10 months is the minimum time frame. For instance, what we saw in Barcelona with the independence, what we saw in Hong Kong last week is another factor. Even Brexit is created some sort of uncertainty, right? And that's one that impacts travel and tourism. Now, however, now when we look at the outbreaks, you will see that from the first outbreaks, it took us 35 months to recover. To the last one, it took us 10 months. The average was 19 months, and everything depended on the decisions made. So let's move to the next. You will see some of the lessons that we need to consider and that we should learn from the past and currently. For instance, from the past, let's make sure that we don't try to reinvent or create new processes. We need to avoid being very creative and working in silos. And we also need to learn from our situation today. Let me be more specific. 9/11 took us years to recover, 5 years to recover. Why did it take us so long to recover after 9/11? Well, because the processes were very slow, and unfortunately the protocols were defined in silos. If I was living in the US, and just as an example, if you remember, every single government came up with their standards for safety and the protocols for safety. Of course, we all were concerned about traveling again. And one of the things that now we're concerned about is earning that trust back from the travelers after COVID-19 to travel again. We need to make sure that we learn in the case of this experience that we had in the past, because even nowadays we're still suffering. Depending on the airport that you fly around the world, they have different standards. In some places they ask you to remove your shoes, in some places they don't. In some places they ask you to remove your phone, in some places they don't. It's not a standard throughout the world. It's very complicated, and that took longer. The first flight that I took out of Miami, the airport, it took me 5 hours to go through that as an example. They did not engage with the private sector, and it took longer the recovery. Now let's compare that to 2008. 2008, it was a different model. That impact, the financial impact, was greater than 9/11. However, we recovered faster. Why did we recover faster? Because there was a coordinated approach. The G20 was used as a platform, and it was a great collaboration, public and private. Ministers of finance worked very closely with the financial sector, and they decided the measures to implement, and we recovered within 18 months, depending on the country, but it was pretty fast considering the impact of 2008 compared to 9/11. So there is a big difference. Now, let's look at SARS, MERS, or Ebola as some outbreaks from the past. In these 3 cases, we didn't implement a vaccine. There is no vaccine. However, we continued traveling. Why was that? Because in these 3 cases, we were able to isolate the people that they were sick, the people that have the virus. Now, this COVID is a little bit different, of course, because we have a lot of people, more than 80% perhaps, that they don't even have the symptoms, or they don't show the symptoms. So we need to look at the outbreaks in the past and what was different, and also learn from the current experience. So what do we need to recover faster? First of all, the essential partnership and collaboration between the public and private sector. If the governments decide to make decisions on their own without the involvement of the private sector, it's going to take longer, the recovery for sure. Second, we need to look at the current process, the current experience, and a difference with 9/11. Let's make sure that we don't invent a new process that will complicate things. If the process is to make things easier, we're fine, but to complicate things is more complex, and it will take longer. Third is we need to embrace global protocols or standards to ensure that we rebuild the trust of the traveler. If the traveler finds hotels here that they can be COVID-free, same standards or same protocols that in Spain or the New York, that will bring some trust back. If we have different standards, as my example, for instance, in the airports, that creates a lot of confusion. We need to make sure that it's the same. And there is a lot of knowledge. For instance, our members have offered their hotels to doctors and nurses. They already keep their premises COVID-free. How do we learn from that experience? And of course, embrace new technologies. How do we use the technology for the contact tracing after the testing so that we can work together? So if we move to the last slide, basically to put things in context, we came up in WTTC with the support from our members in these 4 principles. And I inform or share these principles in the last G20 virtual meeting that we have with the ministers of tourism from the G20 economies. First, and very important, a global coordinated approach is essential to establish effective operations, to remove borders and remove barriers. That is very important. If we see countries starting opening up and it's not coordinated and it's creating confusion, it's going to be very difficult to decide where to go, where can I travel, and what conditions do I have. Even within the EU and in the UK, it has to be very clear what is that coordinated approach. And that's what we're using the G20. Perhaps not the 20 countries are going to open at the same time, but we need to understand who goes first and how that happens so that we learn from the past in 2008. Second is, we need to look at the travel journey. How do we improve that experience? How do we add the health components? And here there are 2 phases, before the vaccine and after the vaccine. A lot of people are saying that perhaps we're not going to be able to travel before the vaccine, and we disagree. We believe that if we learn from the experience of South Korea, we learn from the experience of Iceland, from many countries around the world where they are integrating the testing component, we can travel. And what does that mean? That perhaps I can perform a test, saliva-based, 5 minutes results or 10 minutes result before my flight, and guarantee that the entire airport is COVID-free and the flights are COVID-free. And perhaps I can include in 3 or 4 times throughout my journey these tests with the contact tracing technology that would allow me to move. When we consider that more than 97 or 98% of the world's population is COVID-free, that we don't have the virus, it's interesting to see that everyone is in lockdown because we have not been able to isolate the sick people. We need to include the testing component here, as they have done it in multiple places, so that from the past we can learn, once we isolate the sick people, we can start moving around and of course having some protocols. Then after the vaccine, perhaps we're going to need a health stamp. I'm not talking about a passport because a passport is not needed. We don't want to go back to 30 years where we had a health passport. This is a stamp that will go in your PNR, that will go in your reservation. So let's make sure that we don't create, we enhance existing experience. The third one has to do with the protocols. How do we make sure that we implement standard protocols, that they are defined by travel and tourism private sector, of course, with the feedback from health experts and the public sector to gain back the traveler confidence? How do I make sure that the hotel that I stay in the UK or Spain or the US has exactly the same protocols in my room or within the check-in or within whatever area, so that I know that I'm not exposed or there's less risk to get the virus, as long as it's the same. Going back to the example of 9/11, that is very confusing even nowadays, and we're talking about 20 years, almost 20 years later, still we don't have the same standards throughout the world. These protocols, we're going to be sharing them this week, especially by industry. We have already a lot of knowledge in hospitality, outdoor shopping. We're working with IATA and ACI for the airlines. We're working with the cruises and CLIA for the cruise industry. Restaurants is by vertical, and we should have protocols by industry, but they should be implemented global, so that is not every country has their own. That creates confusion. And last but not least is the continuous support. This is not a switch on and off that we just say now we remove the lockdown and travel and tourism is back 100%. It's not going to be the case. We know that the recovery is going to be in phases. First it's going to be domestic, then regional, then international. We'll have some leisure and family first, and then business. So within this recovery, we need to continue having financial aid for the workers, for the businesses. And of course, there needs to be investment in promotion. This is going to be key based in my experience as former minister, where I went through H1N1, for instance, in my own country. This was crucial to recover faster. So this support is something very important. So from the WTTC point of view, these are our 4 principles that we see short and medium term. And of course, we're also looking after the vaccine is available also to the sustainable and the lesson learned that after this situation and this crisis, how do we make sure that we don't have issues with overcrowding in the future? How do we make sure that we consider all the sustainability components for the new normal as well? Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Gloria. It's really important reminder of just how important it is for destinations that they start getting tourists back as well, when it makes such a huge economic impact in their local areas. It's really interesting to talk there about confidence, consumer confidence, and what it is that they need in order to be able to travel. And I wondered, Tracey and Derek, if we could bring you in here as well. I mean, do you see any particular nuances with the UK market in terms of what they'll need in order to, to have the confidence to travel, or do you think it will be broadly in line with what Gloria's set out for the global picture?
Well, no, absolutely. I would agree with what Gloria has presented there. I think we should be heartened to see that a lot of the research, consumer research in the last couple of weeks, has shown that there is a pent-up demand there to travel. So while we know that the consumer is a little bit afraid at the moment to make those commitments, in the longer term, they have faith that the industry will restore an environment where they can make those choices to travel again. And I think that's where we all have to work together to have a consistent message. And as Gloria has stated there, this is going to take collaboration, and we need to find areas where we have parity with what we are saying to our own nations, but also in the methods in which we are traveling and the processes that people have to go through to make those journeys. So yes, I think that in the longer term view, things will start to move quite quickly when there is clarity about how people can take those steps and how they go forward. But the early days, while we start moving around perhaps more locally, this is also an opportunity for people to gain confidence in the way that things are progressing. So there's still work to be done, but I think that as certainly the summer months move on, we will start to see that progress. And certainly it feels at the moment, a week feels like a month feels like a year. So I think very soon we'll start to see gains.
Yeah. Derek, you've lived through a lot of the crises that Gloria laid out there. Do you agree that lessons will have been learned and that the response to recovery from COVID will be, more streamlined and better than perhaps recovery from previous crises when things were less joined up has been?
Well, the biggest problem I think we have with COVID-19, of course, is it's bigger than anything else that I can remember. And also we know so little at the moment about how things are going to pan out, and therefore the industry or the tour operators that I talk to, when I asked them, where do you see this going and what's going to happen later this year and next year, they all say we need another 2 months before we can even take a guess at where things are going. And of course, the big bombshell that sort of rocked the whole thing at the moment is this proposed 14-day quarantine, which many industry people have said is effectively the death knell for the UK travel industry at the moment. I think the key points to remember when we're talking about recovery are trust and confidence. Now, what I mean by that is the public will start booking again, because I think we all agree there is going to be a pent-up demand. They will book when they trust the tour operators who say we're organised and we're sorted. If it's a trusted brand, they'll believe them. When tourist boards say, come to our destination, it's sunny and we've got lovely beaches, if they trust the tourist board to be honest, then they will think about booking. But until we can win trust and confidence on the part of the consumer, we've got nowhere to go.
Mm. And all of the new protocols, the greater level of coordination, organisation, and hygiene measures, and all of that, it's going to cost a lot of money, isn't it? Tracey, do you think your tourist board members at Antor all feel confident that they will get the government support they need to bring in new initiatives and programs and whatnot?
Well, certainly what we've been hearing over the past weeks, I would say government have done a good job so far of stepping up and supporting the industry as far as they can. I mean, obviously, we would say there's always further room for support, particularly with the airline sectors, although in many jurisdictions the airlines have been well supported. I think what we will start to see coming through are more and more jurisdictions coming through with their sort of clean and safe programs, like Portugal. I know Tunisia, who have been in crisis management many times before. They're on the front foot here. They have health protocols that they will announce soon that will talk about how their visitors will be managed through the process. And again, it's this creating an environment where the community and the industry in the destination is there to make the visitor feel very safe and supported while they're there. It's all a sort of confidence building exercise. But I go back to what Gloria was saying, is that what we want to see here is consistency. We want to see systems in place, whether it is by the way we travel, the way we enter into destinations, that give people that enhanced feeling that this is the way that you can feel safe traveling abroad, and that it's all more and more familiar the more they choose to travel.
Sorry, delivery, bit of an emergency, but I fobbed him off. I'm so sorry. And what were you just saying at the end there, Tracey?
Essentially, the more consistency that we see in protocols, the quicker the public mood will feel safe and secure to start making those travel choices again.
And Gloria, you mentioned WCTC is issuing something fresh this week.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, we have been working with our members and gathering all that knowledge and information. As I say before, our hotels are offering the rooms in New York, in Italy, and Spain to doctors and nurses, as an example. They already have those rooms and those hotels COVID-free. So that knowledge has been incorporated in some protocols that we have defined together. And the protocols will be announced this week for hospitality. Another example, for instance, is the outdoor shopping. Our vast share for Europe is value retail. Value retail has these outdoor shopping centers like Vista or Las Rosas, and they have an outdoor shopping outside of Disney Shanghai. In the case of China, despite that Disney Shanghai has not opened, they opened their shopping center with certain protocols that they learned, and they have been able to see some domestic traveling within China. And those protocols are working quite well. So we are gathering that information, or we gather already that information, and came up with some protocols for outdoor shopping. Same situation, we're working with cruises, we're working with tour operators, we're working with all the verticals, and we're gonna be announcing them as we go to try to bring some consistency. Now, if someone wants to do more than that, that's okay, but at least the traveler should expect to have some level of consistency, and they should know that if before the vaccine you're gonna fly and it's expected from you to wear a mask, you already know, and all the flights should be the same. Or if before the vaccine is expected to do a quick test on arrival in a destination with a contact tracing to guarantee that you don't have COVID and you can move around, they will know. And those kind of pieces within protocols and the experience, as I said, we will announce the protocols this week, and within the experience, we're working with IATA and the different airlines and airports and ACI and ICAO to define that experience, to bring that consistency, because the sooner that we can bring back that trust from the traveler, the sooner that we can recover.
Yeah. We've seen a lot of news coming out from the formal kind of hotel sector about what they'll be doing, and seen Hilton tie up with Dettol and all sorts of different new practices that have been announced. So it's interesting to think about the more informal sector, the sort of Airbnb, apartment sector and so on. I don't know, Derek, do you have any thoughts on whether that less traditional, more informal part of the market will have a tougher job to convince customers that protocols have been followed and that everything's been done than the traditional hotel sector, say?
Okay, I'll split that into two answers. One of the biggest concerns I have, given the specialist nature of our tour operators and the sort of programs many of them run, is that while the recognized hotel chains, Hilton and so on, 4- and 5-star hotels, will, I think, cope with this need for extra way of looking at the, the hand washing and the sanitization and so on. They'll cope with that well. But if you look at some of our operators' programs, they're taking people to small villages in the hills of Peru and Nepal. In theory, there's almost no chance that those villages will change their ways in any way, unless the tour operators educate them and push them to change. I'm sure the national tourist boards would want to encourage that change, but I suspect there's less of a communication between adventure destinations, villages and locations and their national tourist board than we would like. So for me, it is key that some of our major adventure operators get involved in pushing, teaching, educating as Pippa put, the more informal types of accommodation. So that's a big worry to us, but at the same time, our specialist operators succeed the way they do because they have very close contacts with these lesser known communities. So I'm optimistic in the end that will work out. The other point you brought in there was Airbnb. Now that intrigues me because I mentioned earlier about the whole thing about trust. And I think if the Hilton chain, I'm picking on them for today, if the Hilton hotel chain says they've implemented this, that and the other, people will believe them almost without question. But Airbnb says all our hosts all around the world have done everything they should. I think quite a lot of people may be quite worried about going to stay in a room in a house in some province in the States and hoping that their host has done what it's supposed to do. So I'm very interested to see how things pan out for Airbnb and the companies comparable to them.
And Tracey, I know you'll have a lot of tourist board members who have mixed feelings about Airbnb, some who say that new style of accommodation has filled a very important gap for them, and others that feel Airbnb has created problems. What's your take on, oh, do I need to unmute you? Sorry. What's your take on whether it could be a beneficial thing for destinations if there is more of a return to the more formal accommodation kind of sector?
Well, I think this is going to depend on the destination in question and the city and the town, because they've all had a very different experience with Airbnb and how well it's been integrated into their tourism package. I think we'll have to look at how the trends move towards what people are wanting to do when they travel. We could see in the short term, certainly, that people are looking to a more independent traveling environment. Self-catering could be one of those options. And in that instance, Airbnb would have a place in that marketplace. I think that, again, it will come down to local governments perhaps to look at the Airbnb facilities and those types of accommodation providers in their area as to how that works with the local community and whether that fits in with the guidance that they're giving those environments around social distancing and the criteria and regulations that need to be in place. So I think really it's early days to see how that will pan out. I think we've got a longer journey, a more broader journey before we get down to that level. But certainly it will become much clearer by this time next year. We'll certainly see how that's fallen into the overall tourism package.
Yeah. We touched there on kind of over-tourism, and it's something you mentioned too, Gloria, in respect of the 4 stages of recovery. Are you seeing an interest at government level in really engaging on that sustainability aspect at the moment and taking this opportunity to make significant changes? There's a lot for destinations to get their heads around at the moment. Do you feel confident they will genuinely be able to try and fix some of these problems that exist?
Absolutely. We have been talking about overcrowding already for a couple of years, and within WCTC we came up with something that we call destination stewardship, because one of the lessons learned from analyzing why do we have overcrowding, a lot of times it was related to the lack of planning and the lack of engagement of the community. It was not just the public and private partnership, but this is what we call the public, private, and community engagement, that they need to be part of the solution, right? And you need to have responsible practices and value your assets and all of that. What we have seen in a lot of destinations, for instance, in Barcelona, as an example, where they have a great person now, Marianne, responsible for tourism in Barcelona. She's very engaged and she's working with us, very effective. And here, this situation has helped us to pause and include all the different stakeholders to make sure that we have the best long-term plan. And we protect the assets, and sustainability is part of the solution. Within WTTC, we had, for instance, last year, our first Global Climate Summit, where we announced the commitments. We have done a lot of work, but the reality is that we have done a good job in many cases communicating what we were doing. So, and one of the things that we decided last year is let's share best practices, because should not be a competitive advantage. This should be for everyone. And let me give you one example. Dallas Fort Airport is one of our members. They have been, for instance, carbon neutral for 3 or 4 years. It's one of the top 5 airports in the world, but nobody knew that, right? And I say, what experiences can we share from Dallas Fort Airport to other airports around the world in order to be carbon neutral? Because that makes sense. And the same situation, for instance, you talk about Hilton, they were #1 sustainability in the Dow Jones Index, and many other examples with Melia, Intercontinental, that later people start talking about it. But in the case of the destinations, how do we help them with these long-term plans? So that sustainability is part of the solution. And we, travel and tourism, are part of the solution and not only consider us as a problem. So we see a lot of interest from Barcelona, from Amsterdam, from different cities in Italy, for instance, that they want to get this right and they want to make sure that they pause and they produce these long-term plans with the community engaged to get it right. And of course, think about our assets, because if we don't have those assets, there's no tourism at the end. And we also have to put things in context, because this situation has also helped us to put it in context. When you think about Africa, for instance, and the national parks, that right now they're not having tourists to visit. Those tourists pay to sustain and maintain those parks. And now they are exposed. There are a lot of communities, it was mentioned Peru or many other villages around the world, that they depend on these travelers that the tour operators bring to sustain and for the livelihoods of those families. So the social impact is also significant. So we need to factor that in. And now with the situation that we're living, all of that has been now put in context. So it's not only the economic impact, it's not only the jobs that we create, it's also the social impact, and the resources from tourism help to protect nature and parks and doing it in a more sustainable way.
You mentioned there alluded to the importance of protecting the assets that tourism destinations have and managing tourism more responsibly, less just sort of cheap tourism almost, and more higher quality tourism where these things are protected. We're thinking a lot at the moment about what's going to happen with pricing next year, and I just wondered, Derek and Tracey, perhaps with your UK market insight, do you think the British holidaymaker is going to need to see cheap deals before they book? How easily a destination is going to be able to manage that, trying to have a new focus on quality tourism, but also just being really desperate to get some tourists back?
Ladies first.
Well, yeah, I'm happy to go first. I think it's going to be a case of a different product for different sectors of the marketplace. So you could say that luxury travel may have a big reboot by exclusivity terms, in terms of people being able to be more exclusive in the way they travel and where they travel, and being in a less sort of populated area of where they want to go. But at the other end, yes, I think there will be discounting to encourage people to take those journeys and take those flights. I mean, I was reading about a Chinese airline that was allowing people to book 8 seats for £180, which gave them the social distancing, but it also, the seats were relatively cheap to be able to afford to do that. So I think you're going to see something for everyone. And I think that as we see a sort of staggered return, I think, to global travel, so there'll be different pockets of destinations around the world, and when they come back online and when they're more prepared to encourage larger numbers of tourists, they will be gearing up their marketplace for different market segments. And I think as well, that is an opportunity for them to look at the sustainability issue and see how they want to bring tourists into different parts of their tourism product. So I do see plenty of opportunity there.
Okay, just before I come to price, I just want to go back and pick up on the over-tourism point, because it does occur to me that when tourist boards start promoting again for their destinations, as long as social distancing is in people's minds, then obviously you could go to, let's say, Venice, but that's so crowded, social distancing is quite difficult. But if you can promote less visited, let's say rural areas, for want of a better term, this is a great chance to promote the fact that if you travel to where there are open spaces and fewer people, that's a plus. That selling point will die away a little bit as social distancing is lost with time. But I think it's an interesting way to try and sort of tackle over tourism. It's a plus point out of all this. Now back to pricing. I think we all know that the UK travel market generally is all continuously on a race to the bottom in terms of prices. Tour operators try and sell as cheaply as possible to get the business, and the Brits have been educated to go where the price is cheap or better value, if you like. I think in this case there's going to be a slight difference here, because I don't think you can talk about the market, the UK market, all starting to travel again, and when will they start? Because I think it splits into three. I think that the people who know little or care little about the whole situation, I'm thinking of the people you see having barbecues in the street and things like that. I think for them, price will be key, and they will want to book as soon as they can, because they don't really believe that this is such a terrible thing. At the other extreme, you've got the silver traveller, which is, of course, where the money is. A lot of tour operators like working with the grey market, the silver market, because they've got the disposable income. But I suspect that some of that sector will be extremely cautious, and they will wait longer before they travel. And in the middle, you've got, let's say, the followers of the herd. When they see the young people traveling and nothing much happening, they will then start to travel. So I think travel will return in three different ways. And price is only a small part of tempting people to return. Back to what I said earlier, I think trust and confidence is more important. A lot of people will not worry about paying the cheapest price. They'll want to pay a price that allows them to travel with an operator, with a brand, to a hotel brand that they know and trust. That'll be key.
Yeah. And perhaps one for you, Tracey. Do you envisage that tourist boards will radically alter their kind of marketing messaging and their campaigns and really, really focus on trying to communicate about what they've done as destinations to welcome tourists again? Or do you think there'll be a reluctance to focus too much on that and lose the kind of messaging about what makes them brilliant destinations in the first place?
No, I don't think they'll lose that at all. I think there'll be a mix of things. I think most destinations have looked at this as a reboot period. So maybe incorporating some of their forward plans for over-tourism marketing, how they can restructure their destinations anyway for the long term. I think everybody realizes they're going to need very strong messages to come out of this, but no one wants to lose their identity. If anything, you want to bring back a more unique flavor to your destination and show your uniqueness. But what you want to do is also show good practice. So I think that what we will see alongside traditional destination marketing are sort of a higher volume, if you like, of health protocols on site and how they are adhering to government recommendations globally, as Gloria has said, and that consistency of messaging, making sure that people know that you arrive in our jurisdiction and you will be safe from when you leave home, from the airport that you travel through to your arrivals here during your stay and your return home. And that ultimately is what any traveller would like to know when they embark, you know, on that journey. But again, as Derek has said, we will see different layers of society taking different approaches to that risk factor of travel. And we can never be in a situation where you are entirely risk-free. I mean, even before COVID, we were looking at different outbreaks, minor outbreaks that have affected jurisdictions, the mumps epidemic that's been going around the world as well. I mean, we're hearing about that. So we've never, ever been entirely risk-free when we've traveled. But I think that the more we can do as destinations to talk about what we are putting in place to help keep you safe in those environments will help the consumer confidence issue that we're facing now. Yeah.
One nice little example I received information about last week is one of the EU tourist boards has told us, so that we can tell our tour operators, that they will be honouring the EU health card, which of course will go when we leave. And I think that's a small but very important selling point, particularly probably to the older market. You know, and that sort of thing needs to be publicised more. That builds confidence. If I go there and I'm ill, I'll be all right.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about what destinations are doing to draw us back, but I mean, as an outbound market, the UK itself isn't as attractive to certain destinations as it was, perhaps. And it's been interesting to see different destinations talking about where they hope to get their visitors back from first, and we might not necessarily be top of the list because of the extent to which we've experienced the crisis here in the UK. I mean, is there anything you can say on that, Gloria, about the global perception about the UK as an outbound market at the moment, and how potentially damaged that's been?
Thank you. I was muted. Thank you. Absolutely. That's what I say, that communication is going to be key. Of course, as Italy was the epicenter, Spain was the epicenter, the situation that we're living here, New York, for instance, is an example, and everyone in different capacities, of course, and different measures and numbers. When we ask travelers, and we have seen a lot of research as well, what do they think? We need to figure out also how do we reset the tone. These destination boards, they already know that they need to reset the tone, and where are those travelers coming from also is going to be important. And that's why we see two phases, before the vaccine and after the vaccine. Because before the vaccine, we need to have this testing component, that there are some companies already that were working, for instance, in Australia, that I mentioned, $5 US, the testing with 5-minute saliva, you can know if you have COVID or not. That would help to bring some that reassurance. But that destination also has to do some communication and promotion, and say, listen, we are COVID-free. This is what we have done. If you come here, or if you have travelers from our country, this is going to be the situation. Here in this case, we have a phase of that is going to be needed a lot of information and a lot of communication. I can tell you from my own experience, when I went to H1N1, I was responsible in Mexico for recovery of the tourism. There were a lot of challenges because we had the perfect storm. It was not only the H1N1, we had the financial crisis, and then of course security, and we had to reset the tone. And we had some of our industry members, or in that case, the hotel, saying, if you come to my hotel and if you get H1N1, you will have vacations for free all your life, pay here, just to reset the tone. So, because we didn't have any cases back then of H1N1 in Cancun, but because the outbreak was in Mexico, it damaged, of course, the reputation. And in this case, yes, there is a challenge with reputation that we have to overcome. We have to work together. That collaboration is going to be key to put it in context. But the good news is that it's not only one, it's multiple destinations that are suffering. So that's why this collaboration with communication with the travelers, it needs to be together as well, so that we can bring back that confidence. And let me just comment on something I think that was mentioned before about the millennials. I agree. We see the millennials traveling first, and then the silver travelers in the second or third phase. And also is very important, as long as we can start traveling domestic and feeling good and feeling okay, then it's going to be regional. For instance, we see perhaps in summer some travel between the UK and within Europe, but it has to be open at the same time, because if it's only open in one country or another one, it's going to create more confusion, and it's going to be more complicated, and vice versa. Some Europeans, perhaps some nationals from other countries in Europe coming to UK as well. We might see that if we do it right and we don't implement protocols that will put this country in a disadvantage.
Yeah. I'm just going to take one quick question that's come in before we wrap up. It's somebody saying that we've talked about the importance of trust, and how being a well-established brand in the market is a good thing at the moment. Makes it that bit easier to convince your customers that you've done everything that you need to do. She's just asking that if you're a startup tour company, for example, it's still trying to establish their brand and gain consumer trust, is that going to be much more difficult? And what can be done to ensure a newer brand like that doesn't have the heritage of companies who've been going since the 80s? How can they still be sending out the right messages and trying to attract new customers during a really uncertain time like this?
If I can comment, and then I'll allow the experts also to comment, it's just use the same protocols that the big brands. That's why we're saying if you use the same protocols, the same standards, the same procedures, those organizations should be follow their lead and learn from that and benefit from that experience, that and publish that, of course, and say that you're using the same protocols than the advanced players.
To chip in there, yes, I agree with Gloria. It's obviously harder if you're a startup because you haven't got that inbuilt brand reputation and loyalty. But if a startup promotes what it has done or is doing almost more than a regular recognized brand, people will then accept it. I mean, you might be a small specialist operator running, let's say, walking holidays in Nepal. So long as you make it clear what you and your suppliers are doing, then I think you can overcome the initial lack of trust, because people will say, oh, that new crowd, they seem to be doing all the right things, and that you just have to work a bit harder. But I think it can still be done.
Absolutely, and I think as well, work with your tourist board and leverage your brand as highly as you can. And by working with your tourist board, you'll be given more opportunities to be in front of more people alongside the larger brands. And then you can distinguish your own USPs. And as Derek's been saying, the methods that you're using to offer good practice for people to judge for themselves.
Yeah, that comes back to partnership and collaboration, I guess, doesn't it, Tracey? Thank you very much to all three of my panelists, Derek, Tracey and Gloria. It's been really interesting to chat to you this morning. I know we've got a lot of listeners tuning in as well, so thank you for sharing your insight. And to all of our current listeners, we're just going to take a very quick 2-minute break before we start the final panel of the morning. So we'll be back in maybe 2 minutes. Please stay with us, and final thanks to my panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.